Hello, am I coming through okay? Lovely stuff. Thank you so much for coming and sitting in a fairly dark room when it's such glorious weather outside. And I think we can all just take a little moment to appreciate the fact we have air conditioning today, unlike yesterday. So this talk is The Price is Right, What to Charge for Your Indie Game. A bit about me, very briefly. So I'm Lewis. I have been working in and around the games industry for about 15 years now somehow. Started out as a journalist, writing about games for Eurogamer, PC Gamer, PC Zone, when that was still a thing. Then moved into production for a little while, led production teams, working both indie projects and client projects, and eventually found my way onto the dark side of marketing and PR, where I spent about the last 10 years working, 6 of which have been running Game If You Are, which is an indie game specialist PR and marketing agency. So we work with a lot of indie developers, solo developers, and small studios. I imagine a lot of people here today meet that profile. We also work with a lot of small publishers and indie-focused publishers, running various campaigns with various releases for them. And we're also really involved in working with underrepresented communities and developers from underrepresented backgrounds within the games industry as well. So we've been working with Oculus on their Launchpad initiative, and we've also recently launched the Indie Spotlight, which provides pro bono marketing services to indie developers from underrepresented backgrounds and communities. And you know, one of the things that I think unites all of these developers from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds is that it exists away from the kind of AAA publishing status quo in marketing. What I mean by that is that, you know, AAA publishers will often have a very established process that they use. You put the game in, you run it through that process, you kind of know what results you're going to get. And that especially applies to things like setting the price for a game. But in the indie world, it's a little bit less clear-cut, especially if you've not released a commercial game before. So a lot of our clients ask us that question: how do we figure out what price to charge for our game? And in fact, one of the questions that we do get asked quite a lot is, does it matter? You know, am I overthinking this a little bit? Do I just kind of go, yeah, call it 15 quid and be done with it and throw it on the store? Is this something we really need to be thinking about in this much depth? And the fact that I'm doing a talk today probably makes you assume the answer is yes, it does matter, in my opinion, for 2 reasons. Number one, pricing affects consumer psychology. So before someone's even played your game or even really knows much about your game, the price that you're asking for your game communicates something to your audience. Charge too much, and people might think, well, that's not good value for money. There's thousands of games out there that I could buy. I can get a better deal elsewhere. I'm not interested in that game. Or on the flip side, the risk is you price it too low and people go, well, that's suspicious. You know, why are they only charging a £5 for this game that looks really good? Maybe the screenshots are kind of mocked up. Maybe it's not that great. Maybe I'll put my money elsewhere. But you get the price just right, people feel like you're offering that value for money at the right price point, then people are more inclined to say, sure, I'll give that a go. But of course, it also affects your bottom line, right? When you're releasing a commercial game, when you're going into any commercial endeavor, you're taking a risk with your time and your money. And you want to know, or at least be fairly confident, that there is a good likelihood of you recouping that investment, both of actual cash, but also your time, because you can't work for free forever, right? So you want to be thinking about that. And also factoring in things like the fact that the storefront will be taking a cut, and some of the money that you're charging for your game will actually just go to the government for tax as well, for VAT. So all of these things are going to impact your bottom line. Fact is, difference between £10 and £20 as a price point could well be the difference between making a profit, being able to go on and make more games and open up a studio or whatever you want to do, or actually that risk turning into failure and not making a profit or making a loss on your game. So we get asked this question a lot, and we thought, well, how can we help people to arrive at really, really good conclusions as to what to charge for their game? So we thought, can we make a model, really simple model, but something that's really data-driven, to help indie developers pick the perfect price point for their game? And how can we do that in a way that all you need actually is to use publicly available information and a good old trusty spreadsheet to do this? I'm going to be upfront. It's a talk about numbers. There's been loads of really, really interesting marketing talks this week that have been about creativity and innovation and how you can kind of make things look really flashy, and it's very exciting. Those talks are all fantastic. I've enjoyed every one of them. This is not that talk, and I want to be very upfront about that. What we're talking about today is how to take one set of numbers, put them next to another set of numbers, and get a new set of numbers in return. I am going to try and make it quite general. I'm not going to go into loads and loads of intricate detail about formulas and algorithms and things like that, because it's not that complex a model, and it's also very boring to do so. So I'm going to keep it light. I'm going to keep it general. Hopefully it's nice and easy to understand, and I'll try not to make it too dry, given the subject matter. The other thing that I want to be upfront about is that this model is imperfect. There's a kind of a saying in data analysis that every model is wrong, but some of them are useful. And this is, I kind of think, what we're talking about here. We're not going to come up with some sort of perfect, infallible formula that tells you what to charge for your game. So there's a lot of caveats here. Also, it doesn't work for free-to-play games. We're assuming this is a premium price point game. We're going to assume that we're working with Steam. That's simply because most indie developers we work with are launching on Steam as at least one of their platforms. You can kind of use this model to predict other platforms as well, but we're using Steam as a base. As with all models, it's only as good as the data that you feed it, so we need to be thinking about what data we're going to put in. And again, it's not the be-all and end-all. This is really a starting point for your decision-making journey around this. Bear in mind, though, what are we going to use? So we're going to need Google Sheets. Excel is fine too. I'm using Google Sheets. We're going to need a Steam account. If you're like me, you're also going to need the patience to remember where you find the bit where you can select multiple tags at once. This catches me out every time for some reason, even though it turns out it's really easy. You're going to need about 2 hours, 3 hours maybe, give or take. It's kind of designed to be a morning or an afternoon, and then done. That's all you need. Just to walk through very quickly what we're going to be going through today, what we're going to do. Number one, we're going to collect data on our competitors. Again, this is all publicly available data on Steam using user tags. Using that data that we collect, we're going to estimate how much money we think our competitors have made at different price points. We're then going to filter that data set to try and tighten it to your most similar games, the ones that you can really learn the most from. And then we're going to use that to estimate how much you think you can make depending on the price that you decide to charge for your game. So, number one, collecting data on your competitors. What we're going to do is we're going to go into Steam, and it turns out, like I say, it's actually really easy to get to this part of Steam. You just click the magnifying glass next to the search bar. And what that's going to bring you to is the part of Steam where you can filter the entire store based on tags that you select. So what we want to do, first of all, we want to exclude AAA games. Because like we said at the start, AAA games, really a different world. AAA publishing. There's some stuff we can learn from it, absolutely, and you might be competing with some of those games, but for the purpose of this exercise, we really just want to know what other indie games are doing. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to select the indie tag to narrow. And then what you're going to do is you're going to select two keywords that you really think are at the heart of what your game is. Now, when you're selecting these keywords, the really important thing to do is to find a balance between keywords that are too broad and keywords that are too narrow. So I wouldn't be thinking, well, I'll pick the keywords of action and adventure, for example, because actually that's not going to narrow your data set that much. And you might have games in there that are really, really far apart from the one that you're releasing. At the same time, I probably wouldn't just pick like pixel art and retro or something as well, because they maybe aren't, your audience is likely to have wider interests than just that. So we're trying to find that balance. What we're trying to do is find games that are going to appeal as well to your target audience. So two keywords that you think are really central, balance between broad and narrow. And then we're going to do loads of really boring data entry for a little while, I'm afraid. So we're going to bring up a spreadsheet. and we're going to type all of that information in there. We've got the name of the game on the left, so easy reference. How much money each of those games being sold for? What is the price point? How many user reviews have been left on each of those games? And I'll come on to talk about why this is important in a little while. And we're also going to make a note of the overall review rating that it's assigned based on user reviews on Steam. All of this data in this presentation, by the way, is literally randomly generated, so don't pay any attention to the actual numbers here, just there for illustrative purposes. We are going to do a bit more exclusion at this stage as well. So any game that is less than 6 months old or hasn't been on the store for more than 6 months, we're going to get rid of it. And the reason for that is that games less than 6 months old, still fairly early in their life cycle, still probably ramping up those sales a little bit. So the data would be incomplete. We don't want to work with that. Similarly, we're going to exclude games that are more than 3 years old. And the reason for that is the indie game market moves at a relentless pace. So once you get to about 3 years ago, it was releasing into a completely different market, a completely different time, completely different competition. And that might skew your results in a way that is actually not helpful to you. It might start to tell you something that is no longer true about the market. So we want to narrow this down to games that are between 6 months and 3 years released on the storefront. We're going to get all of that information into a spreadsheet. If you don't find at least 50 games, there's a couple of things that might be going on. Number one, it might be that the market you're going into is really, really quiet, and that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing. If it turns out actually there's loads of demand for these sorts of games, but no one's releasing them, make that game. Go for it. That's a great position to be in. It might, however, be that there isn't a market for the game, and that's why no one's developing in that segment. So we want to think about that. Again, just sense check which one of those you think it is. More likely, though, if you find less than 50 games, your tags are probably too narrow. So sorry, we're going to start again with different tags, just widening them out a little bit so that we've got enough data. If you get to 200 games, feel free to stop. You can do this forever. There's a lot of games on Steam. If we get somewhere between 50 and 200, that's an absolutely fine data set to work with for the purpose of this exercise. Okay, so now that we've got all our data, all of our raw information, we're going to try to estimate our competitors' revenue by running the data that we just got through some simple formulas. Now, don't worry, I've made a template. I'm not expecting people to take notes about all of the different formulas that are in this spreadsheet or anything like that. I've done it for you. Feel free to go and grab the template and have a look at what formulas are being run and recreate it and change it. That's absolutely fine. But I thought I'd take a bit of the heavy lifting off your shoulders for today. So if you do go to gamify.com/develop, you get home, you can grab these slides, you can grab the template to work with. But here's the principle. In general, somewhere between 1 in 20 and 1 in 50 buyers of a game on Steam will go on to leave a review of that product. Used to be that it was closer to 1 in 50. It's inching towards 1 in 20. But even still, and we've kind of benchmarked this against games that we've worked on just to sense check it, it's generally between those two numbers is what we see. So knowing that, we can actually estimate, based on the number of user reviews, how many people have bought that game. And in turn, because we also know the price, we can then estimate the revenue that that game has generated. We do need to be a little bit careful with that, though. Because a game that is priced at £10 does not mean that the developer gets £10. First of all, the store is going to take a cut. We've got tax to think about. So we need to be careful about differentiating between gross revenue, the actual total amount of money that is spent on that game, and the net revenue, which is the amount of money that ends up in the developer's bank account at the end of the day. And for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to assume that's 20% tax, 30% store cut. For the tax, it depends on where the purchaser is and what their tax laws are, but it's going to be around those points. Again, don't need to memorize this, but just to quickly show you what we're doing, we're going to take that original data, we're going to remove the tax, and we're going to remove the store cut, and then depending on whether we want to go high or low, we can multiply reviews by 20 or 50 to arrive at our estimates. Which means we end up with something like this, right? So down the right-hand side, we've now got all of those games again We're rounding the price now to the nearest fiver so that we can start to categorize different price points. But the review scores there again, and now we've got this estimated net revenue falls between first number and the second number. And just quickly on that one as well, there are confounding factors as well. When games go on sale, obviously the revenue that's actually generated is going to be lower. Some games go on sale quite frequently. So again, we just need to sense check some of this. But for all intents and purposes, we've got some good general information now about the sorts of figures that your competitors are likely to be bringing in revenue-wise at different price points. But we've still got quite a big list of data, so we want to filter it even more. We want to filter it even more now based on, and I'm just going to be really candid here, how good you think your game is. Because actually what we know is that you can run the best marketing campaigns in the world, you can get the perfect price, you can do all of this right, but actually if your product is not in line with the expectations of the market at a particular price point, then that can lead to problems. So we want to be really honest, actually, about how good you think the game is that you're making. And I would recommend just spending some time looking through all of these games that you've collected data on, thinking about kind of what's the kind of benchmark that you would go with. I would think about the review scores as well. Now, again, obviously there's lots of different factors that influence the review that people leave on Steam, and you get a lot of people being very angry and annoyed on the internet and leaving negative reviews for no particular reason. But in general, the review score, the average review score of a game, gives you a pretty good indication of the overall perception of its quality, right? So what we can actually do is we can start to filter the data based on the average review scores. I would say a good way to do this is to think about the review average that you expect to receive on Steam, the rating that you would kind of think you'd probably end up getting. And then let's just filter out anything that isn't one step either side of it. So if you think, yeah, I reckon most people are likely to leave a positive review. Not everyone, there's going to be some negative ones, but most people are probably going to like this game. Maybe it's a 7 out of 10 game, that kind of thing. Then I would say let's filter in positive, mostly positive and mixed. So that we're filtering this data set now to games that we think are not only of a similar genre and style and target audience, which is the filtering we've already done, but also a similar sort of quality that we're going out with. Again, as with all of these, if you're left with only a tiny number of games, I need to go back a step and try and broaden the filtering a little bit earlier on. So again, we can do this using the pivot table, which you'll find in the template. We can select the review scores that we want to see. That will then spit out what you see on the right-hand side here. I've also, on this one, just ordered the spreadsheet by price point as well, so we can start to actually look at this price point. These are the sorts of revenues that people are making. We can now really start to drill into it. Games in this genre of this sort of style that are priced at around £5, around £10, around £20, what sort of money do we think they are making at that price point? And that means that we can estimate our own revenue potential using this data. And we're going to do that basically just by asking some questions of that data. So a good place to start, what are the median low and high revenue estimates that you're seeing for each price point? Quick aside, the reason we use median in this situation for the average is because if you have like really outlying games, like you've got one game that just went absolutely wild and sold 15 million copies for some reason, but all of the others are kind of lower down, that one outlying game is going to move the average. If you use the median, it won't. So we're smoothing out any kind of weirdness that might come from outlying results and anomalous results here by using the median. You can literally do this just by going to a new cell and typing equals median and then selecting your range. What are the median high and low revenue estimates at each of these price points? How do those compare to what you need to make? This is a huge question. If you think about the amount of money that you're spending on your game, both production and marketing, the number of hours that you've invested into making it over however long, how much money do you need to make? And does this tally with the numbers that you're seeing at different price points? If it's wildly off, then actually that's a big red flag for you to start thinking about as well. Before we even start thinking about setting a price point, is this a good return on investment potential? Is this a viable project that I'm actually going to go out with? So you can start asking these sorts of questions as well. And then are there any patterns and trends that jump out for different price points? Is it actually really clear once you've got this data set, which it might be, that games that are priced at £15 actually seem to be generating more money overall than games that are priced at £20? Is it the other way around? Are there any patterns and trends that you start to recognize? And that's how you're going to start to estimate what the potential is for your game to make based on different price points. But big flashing warning light here. There are certain things that we can learn from using this sort of process and certain conclusions that we can draw from using this sort of process. But it is really, really important not to overinterpret the results or to take the results too literally or not kind of do your due diligence around them. We need to think about the potential versus the reality. This method allows us to see what the potential ceiling is. You know, we can kind of get a sense of, okay, games of this ilk at this sort of price point are making up to these sorts of numbers. But of course, what it isn't telling us is what they did to get there, right? It's not telling us what their marketing spend was. It's not telling us what their marketing activities were. It's not telling us about really anything that they did to actually drive that revenue, partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So what it tells us less about is the floor. Like, if things don't go well, how much loss can we make? You know, that isn't something that we're really thinking about here. So we just need to be careful that we don't overinterpret those results and come to unhelpful conclusions. Sorts of conclusions we can draw, you know, with the right marketing, relatively good games in this genre have the potential to generate millions, maybe. Maybe that's a conclusion we can draw. It could be quite helpful, especially if you're pitching to a publisher, maybe. Being able to demonstrate that potential could be really useful. Saying we want to go at this price point for these reasons, because look at that potential. You could also say, well, relatively good games in this genre tend to struggle actually to make more than a few £1,000s if they're priced below £10, let's say. Again, that might kind of exclude that £10 and below from your reasoning if you've got a good sense of, well, actually, it's probably not going to work for us based on this data. What we can't say are absolutes, right? So we can't say there's no point in charging less than £10 for my game. Maybe there is. You need to think about it. It might be a reason that you want to ignore some of that data, or why the data isn't entirely relevant in your situation. Certainly can't say, oh, if I sell it for 25 quid, I'll be a millionaire, and we're laughing. You can't do that. You can't make those sorts of sweeping conclusions. The reality is, when I said a data-driven model, I was kind of pushing it a little bit. It's not data-driven. And there's a good reason why it's not data-driven. Don't let data drive, please. It's a very common buzz phrase, right? Data-driven, we want everything to be data-driven. The reality is data isn't infallible. Data doesn't understand the context of what you're working on. Data doesn't understand the rhyme and reason between why you wouldn't, you know, why you might want to do something slightly differently, or you've got a unique opportunity or something like that. So data analysis like this can be really, really helpful in identifying trends, looking at tendencies, drawing out patterns, these sorts of things. It can really highlight opportunities and risks. Again, when you're putting together your business plan, when you're thinking about your release strategy, when you're thinking about what price point to set, when you're pitching to a publisher and saying, right, this is what we're doing and why, this is why it's going to be awesome, so we want all of your money, please. You know, all of these things, it can be really, really, really useful for when thinking about pricing, thinking about release strategy. It can help you plot out that route and sense check that route and make sure that you're not going way off piste with your reasoning. But don't give it the steering wheel. Don't end up at the bottom of the lake. And with that, that is the end. I'm happy to take any questions. Yes, so the chaps are going to come around with a microphone so that it can be picked up on the screen. So I think there's a couple down here, and there's a gentleman coming down with a mic as we speak. A couple of hands over here. Yeah.
Thanks, Lewis. Quick question. One is Steam Spy any use in terms of looking at sales rather than reviews? And the second one is opinion. Do you think people are going to trade down and look for cheaper games if times are hard economically? Thanks. I
actually struggled to hear that a little bit. Could you repeat?
Sorry.
Repeat those questions?
First one, excuse me, was you use the reviews to try and estimate sales numbers. Steam Spy also make estimates.
Yeah.
Any use?
Yeah.
And the second question was, if you have any opinion on it, do you think people are going to look for cheaper games if economic times are harder? You get the idea. Thanks.
Great question. So Steam Spy is a really good one. Steam Spy is a resource, if anyone doesn't know, it's been around for ages, that attempts to estimate lots of different data based on data that is available from Steam. A few years ago, Steam changed its API permissions, and Steam Spy really struggled for a little while actually to keep up with that and to kind of become useful again. It has got better again. The estimates have got a little bit more reliable. What we've found when we've benchmarked this with some of the games that we've worked on is that this method is a little bit more reliable for revenue projections. Steam Spy is really good at things like concurrent player numbers and activations, but remember, not all activations will be sales. So it's really good for that sort of stuff. We found that we wanted something a little bit more robust for the revenue projections, which is why we came up with this. As for hard times and cheaper games, well, there's been a trend really in terms of real-term costs of games to go down for a very long time. And I think this has almost happened separately to the economic situation. Certainly the rise of mobile gaming platforms and free-to-play games and things like that has reduced the appetite, I think, for people to spend money. And then the sheer number of games coming out obviously increases the competition. So I think there already is an appetite for lower cost games. It would stand to reason that hard economic times would either accelerate that or certainly, not improve that situation. But I'm not an economist, so it would have to be a very broad answer to that, I'm afraid. Thanks.
Hey, it's super interesting and a super good approach into pricing. I wonder if you have, and this may be maybe more of a reflection than a question, I wonder if you have any thoughts around the value of, you could price down and increase player numbers potentially and increase your reach versus getting the number right in terms of bringing in the right revenue. And I guess, again, it's more of a reflection because it depends what your objectives are. But I wonder if, in your experience, that value of player numbers versus revenue and which kind of direction to go in.
Sure. My feeling on this is that pricing a game down to create additional reach is probably not a good idea because it doesn't do that. If we think about the things that are going to make you more discoverable, certainly if you're launching on Steam, yes, okay, units sold once you're out is going to increase your visibility. But really, in the first instance, we're going to be looking at things like wish lists and store page traffic and things like that, which really you can drive regardless of the price point. And that's going to really increase your reach on the platform. I also think that if someone really likes a game, then they're going to pay what they think is fair for it. And, yes, you might get a few more in thinking, oh, that's a real bargain. But I think, as I said at the start, you've got to offset that with the risk that it devalues the perception of your product as well. So, yeah, it is a balance. All of this is balancing out between numerous different variables. But yeah, I would always be in favor of kind of picking the right price rather than going low in order to try and maximize reach and visibility. There are reasons to go low, but probably not for reach and visibility purposes, in my opinion.
Nice one. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi. I was just going to ask about regional pricing because in Steam's kind of matrix, you'll price something, say, at $10.99. However, in other currencies, that'll be equivalent to £4. And I'm just wondering, is it worth going higher to maximize the revenue, obviously considering against the pound, or is it worth actually matching the Steam algorithm? Because obviously in those countries, they expect it to be cheaper.
Okay, so this is a three-part answer, right? So strap in. Number one, you're absolutely right about that, and that's another limitation of this method as well, because we're not actually looking at where those sales came from. So that's a really good point, something that I just wanted to quickly acknowledge. Number two, I would say trust Steam's recommendations on that matter. Steam has all of the data, right? All of the data, and the reason it's selecting those prices, to be cynical about it, is that's where Steam makes the most money, right? That they want you to pick that price because it benefits everyone. That's where they think that you're going to get the most value. And then the third thing I would say is just be thinking about where your target audience is, and really start with that as your central price point. If you're making a game for the Latin American market, let's say, then actually that should be a starting point of figuring out what the price should be, and then let Steam calculate everything else. If you're going for more UK, US, North America, etc., then use that as your starting point and let Steam build outwards from that.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any more questions?
Here it is. Yes, on here.
I really appreciated the in-depth analysis for that stuff. Part of me wonders whether for indie games there's almost is there a kind of a really simple formula to apply? Like, I mean, there's only like 3 different genres really, aren't there? So it's because I just remember seeing something on the internet about like, oh, if it's a strategy game, it's £20. Oh, if it's a whatever, it's £15. Do you find any of those things work, or do you actually feel that games are sufficiently unique to sort of justify, I guess, a more kind of in-depth one-to-one process?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a dreamer with it, but I kind of think that every game deserves its own kind of rationalized pricing strategy. I know that there are publishers, for example, who say, right, we've put all of this to the test. It's £15. That's what works best. We have the proof. Fantastic. In which case, trust your publisher about that. But certainly, we've worked on like 350 games or something as Game of You are, and what we've seen is that there's so many factors that can sway people in either direction on a purchase based on price. And so, again, there'll be certain trends and tendencies that you can identify without a formula at all, right? Okay, most of these tend to be priced at £15. But I always think it's sensible to scratch beneath the surface of that and go, well, okay, why? Are we just kind of using, assumed knowledge here? Go, well, I mean, there must be a reason for it. They're all going at 15, so there must be a reason for it. Well, maybe. But actually, maybe when we run this analysis, we go, do you know what, though? We can get away with 20 here. Or, you know what, though? Actually, the £10 games are selling just in huge quantities. So we can kind of challenge the received wisdom a little bit. And sometimes you'll get the same answer, but other times it might surprise you. So I think it's a process worth going through.
Thank you.
No problem. Fabulous. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Develop.